Welcome back once again to another episode of Politics for the Culture. I'm your host, Senator Dwight Bullard. Once again, excited to be here to share with you politics for the culture, for us, by us. We want to have these essential conversations for folks to have a better understanding of how they can advocate for themselves, speak truth to power, and make their voices heard. And so we're here once again with another powerful guest. I'm joined today by the executive director of Faith in Florida, another friend of mine, friend of the show, Pastor Rhonda Thomas. Pastor Rhonda, welcome to Politics for the Culture. Happy to have you on.
I'm so glad to be a part of this, and thank you for inviting me to share.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, for those who do not know who or what uh, Faith in Florida is, could you kind of give a breakdown on what it is that you do and what you're hoping to accomplish through Faith in Florida?
Okay, certainly. Faith in Florida, we're a statewide organization. We are present in 35 counties in the state of Florida. 20 of them are over 20 of them are rural. Our work consists of organizing multiracial, multi-faith clergy, congregations, community impacted persons around racial, economic, and social justice. We have three main focuses: is integration, immigration, reducing gun violence in urban communities, and protecting democracy, along with many of our local county issues, which is just a part of the great work of how we organize as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Faith in Florida, I mean, when folks think about organizing in faith communities, organizing in churches, of course, they get this romantic feeling and harken back to the days of Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and folks having these evening meetings before they go out and boycott buses back in the 1950s. They think about places like, the 16th Street Baptist Church and so many other spaces that have been kind of part of our Black history and our American history. But we've been seeing, unfortunately, kind of a trend where people are kind of moving away from, like, faith, unfortunately, right?
Mhm.
What in your opinion is something that faith communities, churches, synagogues, whomever can kind of do? What can they do to start bringing crowds back into those congregational spaces, in your opinion?
Um, Besides pray, um, that's number one. Number two, I think it's so important that we look at um, what our congregants, our communities face every day. That's going to have to be center of our churches, mosques, synagogues, um, and reaching people where they are. And in my faith tradition, that's exactly what Jesus did. And so I think that we're the traditional way of having church that has changed, and it has to change. But right now, people are going through so much. They're encountering so much. And where's that safe place? Where's that place of safety? That place where one can go and be reconciled and be restored. It has to be um, the church, the faith space where we can begin to build hope, giving one a new outlook on all of the different encounters we face. Um, as you know, when you brought up the civil rights movement, the church was, especially the Black church, that was where the power was. And that's where our elected officials went and for advice and how do we strategize and how do we go from here. And the Black church became a threat, and that's why we were set on fire and bombed and all of these other crazy things. And I ask faith leaders now, when have we last been a threat?
Mm.
And when do we become a threat? Where we can't be the norm. We have to be able to meet people where they are. When I say meet people, that's all people. That means young people, youth, our millennials, our Gen Zs, where they feel connected. into this safe space. Here at Faith in Florida, our focus is building a beloved community where everyone feels a sense of belonging. And we know for years now, everyone has not felt a sense of belonging.
I hear that. I mean, it's, kind of staying on that same subject line. We talk about kind of meeting people where they are, and you mentioned things like gun violence and maintaining or trying to restore democracy, whether that be voting rights or the plight of our returning citizens that are always feeling marginalized. Kind of building on that, what are some of the tactics that need to be done by these places of worship to feel more welcoming to people who just have felt marginalized, have felt ostracized, who are also, again, as you pointed out, kind of seeking a place to be restored, right? What and really, is it? Do you feel through your organizing that these faith leaders are ready to kind of welcome people and then lean in on what is happening out in the world and help preserve democracy and stop gun violence? Like, how do we strike that balance, and how do we, I guess I'm looking for what's the first step, and then how do we strike a balance in making sure that we kind of keep that thing going?
Senator Bullard, I saw a shift between 2016 and 2018. In 2016, when I think of returning citizens, it was returning citizens who stated and shared with me it was the church who made them feel the worst. Mm. And I'm like, we can't afford to make anyone feel worse than what they already feel. And based on your own faith tradition, what does that say? And so when I interact with my Jewish community who believe in forgiveness, then that became that sacred place where one can go and feel that they are forgiven or should be forgiven. When I think about my Muslim community and how we engaged in conversations with them, they believe in love, and God is love. And then when we talk about the Christian, if we follow what Jesus Christ, who always went beyond the least and the left out and ministered and witnessed to those. And so when I think about it, I look at the Apostle Paul in the state of Florida will be considered a returning citizen. Or if I look at Joseph, who was committed up. I mean, he was thrown into jail for a crime he didn't commit because he didn't rape Miss Potiphar. And I use that same example and say, well, nor did Tupac rape that woman either. And so what did Joseph and Tupac have in common? If we look at Dr. King, who had been arrested 29 times, he would have been considered a career criminal in the state of Florida, and he probably never would have got his voting rights restored just because of what he stood for. And so when we start taking what happened with some of our biblical folks and what they went through, it's still what exists today. And so even Jesus Christ was hung and crucified for a crime he did not commit. And so we have to be so careful in that area of not throwing any rocks or stones, but being able to understand people for who they are. And then when it comes to our millennials and our young people, we can't forget we were young. And some of the things we done when we were young enough to do it,
Yeah, they just weren't on social media, right?
Exactly. And so I just believe that the way we're organizing and having these real conversations and actually making faith leaders rethink some things on how we actually conduct business as far as in a faith space. We can't forget who really called us and why. And are we really fulfilling purpose in our own calling by not including everyone in this space. When I think about it, I asked my millennial son, who's 27, who what draws him, because he relocated, he lives in another state now, but he was looking for a church that actually included social justice.
Hmm.
That's what drew him to the ministry that he now serves in, is that because of what's happening every day with young Black men, is that anybody there that can relate to what they go through. So real conversations is huge for organizing in the faith community. And sometimes we have to even deal with our own convictions.
That is so true, and I'm glad you touched on the notion of social justice. I think a lot of the disconnect that we're feeling right now is, in the turmoil that has been and continues to be kind of the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter movement, or the continuum of the Black Lives Matter movement. I think there was a hope, right, in this kind of new civil rights mindset
Mm-hmm.
that faith communities would kick in, right? That with all these kind of new organizers and folks who would come to the movement because of the death of George Floyd, the death of Michael Brown, death of Breonna Taylor, and so many others, that similar to the pictures that kind of we all saw growing up, that on the front lines of that would be, Pastor so and so, or Rabbi so and so, or imams that we saw kind of locking arms with Dr. King and so many others. What can churches do to kind of add a social justice ministry to their thing? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think they, I've been to churches, multitude of churches that talk about, of course, they kind of tiptoe around the social justice aspects of, what Jesus Christ advocated for, or what Muhammad advocated for, and their kind of direct connection to these social justice movements. But like structurally, like, what should a church be doing, or what should a mosque be doing that speaks to actually ministering around social justice and kind of political advocacy in the ways that they should, or that they could?
Number one, and I share with many, just read your own Bible. And if you believe in all 66 books, you will see social justice all through it. And then secondly is, when you mention social justice ministries, and it all depends on what denomination. Some do not call it a social justice ministry. Some say social justice teams, whatever that may be, to implement that in your curriculum, or whatever you may want to call it in your church, and make it as the social justice ministry is just as powerful as the choir or the ushers or whatever ministries, the praise team. It's just as important, because if it's it can be used in so many ways to not just assist in aiding communities and people who are impacted by various issues, but it also can help grow your church. It can, and that's what church is like anyway. How do we evangelize and grow, our ministry? And so, and I think back and reflect back in 2012 during that campaign, No on 3, is when a social justice ministry was implemented in my own church, and the community began to look at us as, oh, that's the church that helped people. And it made a huge difference. The AME have always had social justice ministries. It's now, how do we make those ministries as strong as it could be, where it can literally impact a community that can bring change? So now we, in our churches, many people don't even live in the community of where they worship. Nevertheless, it's communities that we cannot afford to leave out. And, regardless of where you live, when we all come together, we can still really build this beloved community. The same with our Jewish community. I didn't even realize until I started organizing how involved some of our Jewish synagogues were during the civil rights movement. And so I just really believe, even in our faith traditions, we still, when it comes to social justice, we have more in common than what actually separates us.
Agreed. Agreed 1,000%. We talk about how to do outreach. We can't not talk about social media, but I know that social media is kind of a touchy, iffy thing because there's so much going on, whether it's your TikTok or your Instagram or your Facebook. And I know during the pandemic, many churches, by the nature of what the pandemic created, had to move to online services and virtual services. And so now you're starting to see kind of like even older churches have more of a technological feel to them. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how to compete, or should there even be a competition in trying to draw the attention of young people who are, kind of living their everyday lives on social media, engaging in these spaces? Should faith communities, in the spirit of meeting folks where they are, should they start to go there? Or is it more of a we'll be here when you get done with that kind of thought process that they should adopt, or somewhere in between? Would love your thoughts.
I think it varies on sometimes the denomination and sometimes the mindset of the leader of that church. I believe because of COVID, the smallest church that went use social media in a way of worship, they became mega. We have the mega churches and then we have smaller churches, but because of social media, we was forced, if you wanted to continue to worship, is to go in a space that we were not used to. Some of us, I won't say all, and what streamlining is and what it's like to be on Facebook and Instagram. But also, we were able to reach people who were unchurched. And I think it's so important that we take advantage of that moment. I think that many of our faith leaders need to be delivered from tradition. I'm not saying being delivered from um, believing in whatever your faith tradition teaches, but some of us, we can no longer have church like our great grandmother have and still be able to meet people where they are. I'm just a firm believer, and I may not have all to agree with me, but it's a difference when you're trying to reach young people, not just reach them, but keep them. And so, if they're really our future, we have a responsibility to meet them where they are and try as hard as you possibly can to be willing to have some form of understanding. And I'm very intentional. I love young people, and they teach me a lot. And so with that teaching, it don't only that I consume that. I may not always agree, but I'm open enough to receive what I can, and then also if they allow me, and I know through relationships they will allow me, is that you got something good going on. It just need a little structure so it can be received beyond your own generation. And I found that to be it's so workable. And then it's also building a form of trust, because right now, many don't trust our faith leaders in our spaces of worship. They will say, I still love God, but I don't have to go to church. So how do we connect with why it's so important to bring both together and social justice in a way that gives them a platform for their own voices to be heard within the faith community? I think
Indeed,
it's powerful.
indeed. And when I think about voices in the faith community, at least on a national level, I think about Jamal Bryant and the work that he's done. Talbert Swain, Bishop Swain, always seems to stay on Twitter, providing provide a little smoke in the city and everything. And I appreciate them just being very upfront about that. On the flip side, though, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, the church or religious institutions get vilified because there are folks out there who immediately start saying, well, the evangelicals are breaking this way, or conservatism dictates that faith community should be fighting against the quote unquote changing of the world or changing of America, which I personally view as just a wider acceptance of people, who they are and where they are, right?
Mhm.
And kind of getting to a point where it's like, okay, if people are going to be who they are, how do we engage them in a deeper conversation around faith and their own beliefs, right? Because you have these folks that are that are out here, like a prime example is, it always seems that there's an annual debate on, will the Catholic Church get rid of Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi because of their voting record on these things. How do we start to get away from this real kind of divisive notion and just what you talked about, right? This idea that people want to have some sort of structure, people want to have some sort of belief system and faith, but they don't want to go into a space and be judged because they decided to vote one way or the other during an election. So how do we kind of break down those walls? And what do you? I know it's a loaded question, but I think just kind of what is a good first step that you can kind of
That is
entertain?
that is a magical question, Senator Bullard. You know what? It's so funny you said that, and I pondered in some areas of when it comes to the faith community, it's easy through a conversation to break down some of those barriers. In some areas, it calls for a whole lot of fasting and praying because they're not budging. Um, but I really, and I hope I'm not gonna step on any toes, but I saw something that I was able to use to really, really make faith leaders rethink some things, and that was Roe versus Wade. And it went beyond what was actually being put out there in the area of abortions. And I was like, this is bigger than abortions. Um, you got to see a bigger picture. And I knew I was walking, I was going to have to walk on some eggshells. But in result of it, it did open the eyes. I do believe that God used situations to occur just so we can take the scales off our eyes to see something deeper and bigger of what is happening and how we're impacted. And I just think that regardless of what, I don't care who out there marching, Black people are going to be impacted. I don't care what happened, whether you go to church or you don't go to church. And then to just, get faith leaders in a comfortable space, which is not always easy, uh, where they can really, really just rethink some stuff on how we even think and do things and approach things, and and then give enough space to say, well, even when we read the Word of God, look how many interpretations can be taken from that one passage, and then sometimes we can miss the whole picture. So it in the way of organizing, and it does take a whole lot of one-on-ones, as we would call it in the organizing field, with faith leaders, to a whole lot of agitating, rethinking. Let's look at our own families and what that consists of. And so far it's workable. And then it gives room for us to be open, for other people to come in and share their own experiences. And are we as the church really living out everything who we say we are?
Gotcha. And on that note, and kind of closing out, and hope this doesn't step on toes either, or but I think it's a moment of levity just because it's out in the movie theaters now. I had the opportunity to see this new movie, Honk for Jesus, Save Our Souls. Right? I don't know if you've had a chance
Is
to
that
check it out,
with
Pastor Rhonda.
is it comedy? Is that with
So this the one with Regina Hall and
yeah, I
and
haven't seen it,
Sterling
but it's
Brown. So it's shot, not to give it away, but it's shot in what they call a mockumentary style. So it's feel like a documentary, but it's still a movie because it's fictional characters. But
mhm.
of course, it kind of touches on the issue around what happened with Bishop Eddie Long, and kind of talking about that. So of course, social media has been having a bunch of conversations about, is it too soon? Is it time to finally start having these conversations about, the role that the church has kind of played in some of these stories? And this goes beyond just the Black church. I mean, same argument is being had around the Catholic Church and their role with some of the issues that they've had, right? And I guess kind of as a final question, as you kind of like live in this world where you're engaging both the secular community and the faith community around tough conversations, do you think we're at a point where people are ready to have honest conversations about what we see playing out in real life, in some of these spaces? And because it's opened that kind of Pandora's box a little bit, so I'd love your opinion on that.
I really thought that after the murder of Trayvon Martin, that was the door opener for some real conversations to take place. And as that continued to grow, I really believed it. But I'm now feeling in a way of there are still some that's not as comfortable because of what's going on every day. But when we start now, and I just had a conversation with white clergy on the replacement conspiracy theory. And how are you talking about that with your own congregation? And with that, in some ways, I feel like we're not as ready as I thought we were because of many are not comfortable with the reality of what that really means for some. And I think some are ready. I think we're a long way from where we came from, but I still see in the work that we do, some still struggle in being completely transparent. Um, the critical race theory, that too. And so, I'm keeping hope alive. Um, that's my area. I think that's where God used me, is to initiate and agitate, and let's rethink and let's talk about some of the things that makes us uncomfortable. If we don't, we'll never be able to build a beloved community where everyone feels a sense of belonging.
Well, I'm gonna let you drop the mic right there, and I want to thank you, Pastor Rhonda, for joining me on Politics for the Culture and bringing all your sage wisdom. And I hope that that the messages that you shared land on all the souls out there, because I think everyone needs to hear it. So thank you again, Pastor Rhonda, for joining me today.
It was a blessing, and until we meet again.
Indeed. I'll see you out there on the road.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Rhonda. Once again, folks, Politics for the Culture aims to have the conversations that folks may be unwilling to have. And so understand what we mean by that is that we all have our different walks and journeys and experiences that we have to go through. But in order to build that beloved community that Pastor Rhonda talked about, we have to be courageous enough to have conversations amongst one another, agree to disagree, and find common ground where we can in order to move this thing forward. And so the culture is all about pushing forward, and we want to make sure that you all understand that we want to serve as a platform for pushing those conversations forward and into the future. As the good book says, faith without works is dead. So this is me having faith in the future, but also putting in the work to make sure that the future I want is bright bold, and vibrant. So look forward to seeing you next time on Politics for the Culture.